is better? Yes. Okay, so welcome to the blockchain panel. I'm Camila Russo. I'm a reporter with Bloomberg News. I'm going to be the moderator, and I will let our wonderful panelists introduce themselves.
Hello. Oh, that's loud. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Weiniger. I am the founder of SAFE. SAFE is a national healthcare company focused initially on the underserved market of sexual health. We just launched the SAFE app, which lets people show their verified STD status privately on their phone, and it's the cheapest, easiest way to get tested and treated. We are built on the blockchain. It's a private hyperledger blockchain that basically acts as an immutable ledger of what, when, how, and why patient records were accessed to keep these hypersensitive records super secure. And then the SAFE coin will be used within the SAFE health ecosystem, basically as a proxy for insurance for people to pay for healthcare services and products.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Meltem Demirors. It's great to be here and see so many wonderful, accomplished women here, as well as so many students. I have spent the last 5 years investing in the digital currency ecosystem. I started my crypto career, if you will, by building an investment firm here in New York with a group of others, which became one of the largest investment firms in the industry. While I was there, invested over 100 different startups across 30 different countries, primarily startups that were using Bitcoin to facilitate payments, building infrastructure like exchanges and other financial services, and also companies focused on leveraging blockchain technology rather than the assets themselves in new and novel ways, whether for consumer use cases or enterprise use cases. In January, I left and I launched my own firm. I personally invest in companies through both equity and this new idea of tokens or assets issued on a blockchain. And then in May, I joined an asset management firm called CoinShares. We are a digital asset manager. We have 4 regulated products that are traded on the NASDAQ in Sweden, primarily by retail investors and institutional investors. And then we also have private hedge funds that primarily cater to providing access exposure to this new asset class to institutional investors. So very much on the asset management side.
Hi, my name's Emma Channing. Very much like Meltem's journey. I started in the space 2 years ago, founded my own company in December of last year. The Satis Group is an advisory shop, but specifically into securities. We specialize in security tokens. These are things that are sold as securities in private placements predominantly. They will be able to trade on things that are called ATSs. And we specialize in the design and offering of capital markets offerings like that.
Great. So first of all, blockchain has become such a huge buzzword, and people, have claimed it to solve all of the world's problems, from taking down banks to improving democracy. So just to start, I would love for our panelists to tell us what blockchain is, if that can be defined succinctly, and especially what they think that it can be used for. What's it good for? What's it not good for? If Emma wants to start.
Well, I tend to be fairly vocal about this, which is why they're nominating me. Blockchain tends to be a buzzword. It's become a bit like AI and quantum computing. People kind of latch it onto their projects in some ways when it doesn't make sense. Blockchain is basically a glorified Excel spreadsheet on the internet across several computers using what we call Byzantine actors as encryption. It's not particularly fast. It's not particularly user-friendly. It's great when you're dealing with identity, transactions, verification, provenance. Laura's company is a very good example. Everledger, which operates in proving the life cycle of precious jewels, is another good example. That's what it works very well for. For the vast majority of other data, it really doesn't work. So there are other software tools, Apache tools, MongoDB, on private servers on Amazon Web Services, which will work much better for most data-driven businesses. An example of kind of how it works very well is the indictment of the 12 Russian GRU officers by the DOJ in July of this year. All they had, people tend to think that Bitcoin and the blockchain is used for dark money, but actually the mapping function is NSA code. And one of the examples of how very powerful it can be is that all the US intelligence officers had to do was break the Russian email account. And then they could map, because transactions in Bitcoin are on a public blockchain, it's a web address. All they needed to do is see where the payments were going through and from the email account, and then match it to the public address in a way that was far, far faster than it would have been if they were having to show transactions through PayPal or a bank account or otherwise. So in some ways, this transparency is actually a great thing from an enforcement perspective.
So I have a slightly different take as someone who's investing in both the assets that are issued using the technology, as well as the technology companies themselves that are providing products and services to both users like us via this great device. We have these little supercomputers in our pocket, as well as big companies like IBM, Amazon, Facebook, Google, which we all know and love. So to me, the starting point for blockchain, it really was Bitcoin. The fundamental idea behind Bitcoin is still the idea that motivates me today. My family is from Turkey. My parents come from a very poor part of Turkey. And one of the things I always observed as a child, I grew up in Europe and in the US, but I always noticed there's this big difference between people who have access to the financial system, people who have the ability to borrow money, use a credit card, these things we call financial services, and people who don't. And I think that's been a recurring theme we've talked about today. To me, one of the most interesting things about Bitcoin is the idea that any person anywhere in the world can transact with anyone else anywhere in the world, whether it's exchanging information, to Emma's point, or exchanging value, which could take the form of Bitcoin or many other things, using a piece of software that anyone can download and run. And so the idea of combining open source software, which was popularized by BitTorrent. How many people here ever used Napster? Don't be afraid. I did. Okay. So the idea is like using Napster to share music, which is not a great example. The idea was that anyone in the world could download the software client and engage in transactions. And while at its surface, the initial perception may be, oh, this is nefarious and it's bad for governments, actually there's some really great use cases for something like Bitcoin. One great example for us here, given the theme of today, there's a company in Afghanistan. What they do is they pair young women in Afghanistan, they teach them how to code. Many women can't leave their homes without having a male relative or family member accompany them. And so these women are able to work from home because they're doing software development work. And more importantly, the way they get compensated by their clients is by Bitcoin. They don't access it through a bank account. It's not cash that a family member or their husbands can seize. It's money that they own on their computer, and they have freedom to spend it, convert it into cash, utilize it how they like. I think that's one powerful example of enabling underserved populations or people in parts of the world where there are cultural, social, political barriers to financial freedom. You get a little bit more financial freedom. Does that mean blockchain and Bitcoin and these assets are going to replace the money we all use, like US dollars? Probably not, but I think it's wonderful that we live in a time where there is a viable alternative, and to me, choice is really powerful. So that to me is blockchain technology. Choice in what assets you use, transact in, choice as to what you perceive to be valuable. And if that's code, great.
Lauren.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. So blockchain it's a transformative technology for a few very specific, important use cases. It is not a transformative technology that makes sense for most use cases, but for those few that it does make sense for, it is absolutely the best. For us, we're using it for, as you said, the identity verification. Having an immutable record that cannot be changed of where records, things like healthcare records are accessed. It's incredibly important. Identity verification. I need to know who you are. That gets harder and harder. Without this, we wouldn't be able to do it as effective as we are now. But it's funny that I think it's honestly one of the least sexy parts of my company, but because there's this sort of mystique and air around blockchain technology, it ends up coming up more than you would think. And I think that's great, and I like that people are learning it. I think that there's applications to many coins. There's many coins that there are no applications to, and I don't know how they exist. So yeah, with us, we're not doing an ICO. It's regular old-fashioned equity-funded company. But there's a real value to having an alternative to a monetary influx of cash or other, where you can actually use that to redeem services. So it really creates more access to people. And in our case, it's for healthcare, which I argue there's really no more important thing to enable greater access to.
Great. So now I'd like to narrow down all these, broad use cases and ways that we can use blockchain and cryptocurrencies to how can women specifically leverage this technology?
Sure. I can start with some companies I've invested in. So I think one important aspect, and we were chatting about this before we all got on this stage, I do think because this is inherently financial technology, it started off with value transfer. There is a lot of opportunity. I worked in finance. Emma worked in finance. You worked in finance. Finance is difficult. It's male-dominated. The majority of the world's executives, investors, capital allocators, people who control what gets funded and what doesn't are male. So being in a space that's new, being in a space that's a bit more technology driven, and being female has actually been advantageous. There's a lot more opportunity in this new space. It's not as entrenched. There's not, some of the power dynamics are starting to emerge, but Emma and I are able to run our own finance firms, which has been great. I don't think you'd see that in a lot of other industries. So I think for starting new businesses, raising capital for new businesses, this technology has been really impactful. And in fact, there are numerous female fund managers, asset managers, investors who are prominent in the space, well-known, well-respected, which is great to see, but also rare. I think the second aspect is there are a lot of companies being built by a diverse group of entrepreneurs in different parts of the world that typically wouldn't have gotten funded, that have been able to either self-fund because they held Bitcoin and Bitcoin went up tremendously in value, and they've been able to leverage that to grow and build their business without traditional venture funding. And the second component is there are people building businesses that are leveraging properties of this technology to protect and enable women. There are companies focused on enabling safety and security for sex workers in transactions. It's a part of our economy that we don't talk about. There's a lot of applications pertaining to civil rights. The UN itself last year set up a fund to actually use cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology in specific environments, whether it's in refugee camps, in war zones, and that's been great to see, where there are actual international agencies who have authority that are trying to use this technology and test it and see where it works and doesn't work. So I think, and then the last component is, free speech and censorship resistance. So there's been a lot of really important work done. WikiLeaks in particular has leveraged Monero, which is a cryptocurrency with a lot of privacy enabling features, to enable people to fund WikiLeaks without having their identities exposed, like they might be if you use your credit card and put in your home address. So I think there are a lot of important implications, in particular for underrepresented populations, but also for women to directly participate in building, funding, and promoting some of these new projects.
Does anyone want to add?
I might just say, because I think there's a lot of people in the audience, younger women who are maybe exploring career options, and I think if I were starting out today, it's something I would really dive into, partly because it is this newer industry, so there isn't an old guard. There's an old guard emerging, but it's male-dominated, but relatively speaking, it's very female-friendly, and obviously you guys know more than me. I'm not so much in the same, but there's so many women that are at the top now that didn't have to claw their way up in a similar way that you did in maybe traditional finance. And I think there's a real collaborative atmosphere amongst those women that are then helping those below them to rise up. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I echo those same comments. It is liberating to see so many strong women come together, come out of finance into this space. You have to learn very fast, you have to address a lot of issues, but if you're willing to do that, then it's quite possible to found your own shop and do your own thing. These companies tend to be what we call distributed, which means basically everyone works from home. That gives you kind of latitude for people who are working mums and, otherwise time commitments. We'll all live where we want to. Some of us are in California, some of us in Colorado, some of us here. So there's just a lot more flexibility, but also, at least for, my experience of the senior women in this space is that they're hugely supportive, very collaborative. Meltem and I belong to something called Collective Future, which is a general diversity group. Out of that is coming We3, which will be dedicated to mentoring women in blockchain. And that's been fantastic and just very, very good to see that women have to support other women. Madeleine Albright is pretty much on the money. And generally speaking, we have a high say-do ratio in our space.
Okay, so it's interesting. So we saw different aspects of how women can leverage blockchain and cryptocurrencies. On one hand, there's just the fact that this industry is so new that there's not as many entrenched male-dominated institutions and boys clubs in the space, that maybe it's easier to break through and get to the top, if you will. Then there's the aspect of the technology itself. That
it's not easier. You still have to be really good. It's not easier. I just want to refute that, because I think that's sending there's no lower bar, and there can't be a lower bar. So that's an important point.
There's no lower bar, but there are some lower barriers.
Right. Okay, that's true. Because even if, as you said, there are really good female role models in this space, it's still very male dominated. I mean, it's still mostly men. Some of it are aggressive. Because of the nature of the internet, there's trolls everywhere in the space. So yeah, maybe if you can all let us know how to deal with the bad side of this. And is it just different from regular finance and tech? I mean, are you dealing with different sorts of personalities? Do you need to employ different tools?
I think it depends whether you mean the people who we do business with or the crazies. The people who we do business with are fantastic. There's a real group of adults that have kind of found one another in the last year. Amongst those, the guys that I work with are fantastic allies and very supportive, and all of the things that you would want to see. Yes, there is a component within the space of very misogynistic, crazy guys, but, generally speaking, we only rub up against them in, conferences and that kind of thing, and just basic security. Watch out for people with crazy facial expressions and upper body language, walk in the opposite direction. I mean, I do get grabbed and harassed at the conferences, but that's not the people we do business with. That's not who we're building this industry with.
Right.
Look, at the end of the day, you have to be aggressive. You have to demand a seat at the table. I make sure everything I do, you set your own value. So I made the choice to leave the company I was at to set up my own shop, because that was how I was going to realize my value. I make sure everything I do, I have a seat on the board, a say in how decisions get made. No one else is going to advocate for you. Luckily, we work in an industry where we do have allies, and generally I think people are collaborative, but this is no different than any other industry. This is about finance, it's about money, it's about power, it's about all of the things that make the world go around. So I don't want to fool anyone into thinking this is some sort of utopian paradise where we all hold hands and sing Kumbaya, because it's certainly not. So I mean, all of the same thing, you take risks, we've all taken risks. I took a massive pay cut and took on a tremendous amount of debt to get into this industry, to start my own business. So I think, all of the same principles that would apply to any other entrepreneurial venture certainly apply here. You have to advocate for yourself.
I mean, yeah, so I'm not in blockchain. I am in healthcare, and I have a healthcare company that utilizes blockchain. So, but to be honest, me walking into a room with the healthcare executives, way more male dominated and way more, there's a lot more initial proving ground that has to happen to kind of get over the women barrier, or whatever you want to call it. Whereas with blockchain crowds, it's actually, I think, a relatively open-minded, friendly group, but I don't have as much experience in it as you guys. I will say that it's been tremendously important for us, and it will continue to be so, and that's about it.
Okay, great. Okay, so to wrap up, there are great opportunities in blockchain for women, but you need to be tough. And if you are, it can be worth it, I guess. So thanks to our panelists.